Emma Collins had always been the kind of woman who found beauty in simple things. Her small cottage on the edge of Willow Creek was surrounded by blooming wildflowers, and her days were filled with soft music, warm cups of tea, and long walks through the woods with her German shepherd, Max. She was known in town as gentle and kind, always offering a helping hand or a smile that could brighten anyone's day. But behind her peaceful life, something was going terribly wrong. For nearly a year, Emma had been experiencing strange symptoms: extreme fatigue, muscle weakness, and sudden bouts of dizziness that came without warning. Doctors ran test after test, but nothing concrete ever came back. It wasn't until a specialist in the city took a closer look that the truth emerged. Emma was suffering from a rare autoimmune disorder that was aggressively attacking her nervous system. By the time it was discovered, the disease had advanced far beyond what anyone had expected. "You should prepare for the worst," the doctor said, his voice calm but final. "You may only have days left." Emma sat in stunned silence. Days. Not weeks. Not months. Just days. The ride home was quiet. Max sat in the back seat, his head resting between the front seats, sensing something was terribly wrong. Emma's sister, Lily, who had driven her to the appointment, kept looking over, her eyes red from tears she tried not to shed. Back at home, hospice care was arranged. A hospital bed was placed in Emma's bedroom. She was too weak to climb stairs, so she stayed on the ground floor. Visitors came in a steady stream: old friends, neighbors, distant relatives. Some cried quietly, others tried to be cheerful, but everyone left with heavy hearts. But Max stayed. He lay beside Emma's bed, day and night, refusing to eat more than a few bites. He watched every breath she took, nudging her hand gently with his nose whenever she stirred. Nurses were amazed at his calm, almost human understanding of the situation. He didn't bark or whine, just stared at Emma with a quiet, powerful intensity. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, the air was still. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt the same thing. They were waiting for Emma to slip away, waiting for goodbye. But Max wasn't waiting. Max was watching. And somewhere deep inside, Max was planning something no one could see coming. Max had been more than just a dog to Emma. He had been her protector, her confidant, her best friend. She rescued him from the shelter when he was just a pup, a shy and scrappy German shepherd with a crooked ear and a wagging tail. At first, he'd been wary of people, cautious around strangers. But Emma had a way of calming him, of making him feel safe. Slowly, over the years, Max had transformed into the embodiment of loyalty. He was her shadow, following her from room to room, even if she didn't need him. Whenever Emma had a bad day, he'd nudge his head into her lap, offering silent comfort. When she was lonely, Max would curl up beside her on the couch, his warm presence enough to fill the silence. There was never a question in Emma's mind that Max was a special dog. He seemed to understand her in ways no one else could. As Emma's condition worsened, Max's behavior became even more pronounced. Where other dogs would have left their owner's side in search of food or play, Max stayed glued to Emma's side, refusing to leave her room for even a moment. When the nurses arrived to check on her, Max would sit at the door, watching them closely, his eyes never leaving Emma. Sometimes he'd stand and move closer to her, as if to shield her from the world outside. Even when she slept, Max remained alert. He'd lie beside her, his head resting on her feet or curled at her side. Emma noticed that he didn't eat as much as he used to, nor did he show any interest in going for walks, his once boundless energy replaced by a deep, unwavering concern for her well-being. It was as if he knew the gravity of the situation, understood the silence that hung in the air. One afternoon, when Emma could barely lift her head from the pillow, she looked down at Max, his eyes locked on her with an intensity that startled her. There was a quiet urgency in those eyes, something unspoken, as if he was trying to tell her something. "Max," she whispered, reaching down to pat his head. "What are you trying to tell me?" Max didn't respond in the way humans would expect. He didn't speak, didn't bark, but Emma could feel the weight of his gaze, and for a brief moment, she felt a spark of hope. It was in that moment that Emma realized Max wasn't just waiting for the end. Max was waiting for a sign, waiting for something to happen. And somehow, deep in her heart, Emma knew it had already begun. The house that once echoed with laughter and the soft sounds of daily life now felt like a shell, a place frozen in time. Emma's cottage, which had always been a sanctuary, now seemed to be filled with the heavy weight of waiting. The small ticking of the kitchen clock, the faint rustling of the leaves outside, everything seemed amplified in the stillness. Family and friends came and went, some bringing food, others offering kind words, but it felt like a performance. Everyone pretending that life could still go on when deep down, they all knew it couldn't. Emma's health continued to decline rapidly. She spent most of her days lying in bed, her body too weak to do much more. Her voice had become a whisper, her movements slow and labored. But Max remained by her side, more steadfast than ever. Max's behavior had changed, too. He no longer bounded around the house with the exuberance he once had. He wasn't the playful dog that would chase after sticks or jump excitedly at the door when someone came to visit. Instead, he was a quiet, watchful presence. Every time Emma would stir, he would lift his head, his eyes never leaving her face. If she coughed or moved slightly, he would nudge her gently with his nose, as if checking on her. One morning, Emma's brother, Jason, noticed something strange. He had come to visit with a basket of groceries, but as he approached the house, he found Max standing at the front door, staring intently out the window. The dog's eyes were fixed on something in the distance, his body tense, as though he were waiting for something. Jason paused, watching for a moment, but Max didn't move. He just stood there, unblinking, focused on the world outside. "Max," Jason called softly, stepping closer. The dog didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge him. It was as if Max was in a world of his own, waiting for a moment to come, something no one else could see or understand. Jason entered the house quietly, carrying the groceries, but Max didn't follow. Instead, the dog remained at the door, his posture unwavering, his eyes still locked on the distance. Later that afternoon, Emma's condition took another turn for the worse. She could barely keep her eyes open, her body racked with weakness. The doctors had said that this was it, that there wasn't much more they could do. But still, Max didn't leave her side. As the evening drew in, the house fell even quieter. Emma slept, and Max lay at her feet, his breathing steady, his watchful eyes never closing. It was in that stillness that something felt different. There was a strange energy in the air, something Emma couldn't explain but sensed deep within her heart. Max was waiting for something. And so, it seemed, was she. Late one evening, as the moonlight filtered through the curtains and cast a soft glow across Emma's bedroom, Max did something that would change everything. It was just after the hospice nurse had left for the night. Emma had fallen into a light sleep, her breathing shallow and labored, and the house had once again settled into silence. Jason, who had been sitting by the window watching the darkness outside, glanced over at Max. The German shepherd, who had been lying quietly at Emma's feet, suddenly stood up and trotted to the small wooden cabinet by the door. Jason raised an eyebrow. Max didn't often act this way. The dog was usually content to stay by Emma, watching over her as if guarding her from the world outside. But now, Max's movements were urgent, his tail stiff, and his eyes focused on something no one else could see. Max began pawing at the cabinet, first with one paw, then with the other, as if trying to open it. Jason stood up, confused. He'd never seen Max act like this. Slowly, he approached the dog, bending down to see what he was so determined to find. When Max didn't stop, Jason opened the cabinet door, half expecting to find a spilled bottle of cleaning supplies or something of little consequence. But inside, tucked in the back behind a row of unused tea bags and old bottles, was a small, forgotten box of herbal remedies. Jason had seen them before. His mother had given them to Emma when she was first diagnosed, suggesting she try some natural treatments alongside her regular medicine. But over time, the herbs had been tucked away and forgotten. The idea of using them had faded in the face of more traditional approaches. Yet here was Max, insistent, nudging the box with his nose, as if he knew exactly what it was. Jason hesitated. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but the sheer determination in Max's behavior stirred something inside him. Maybe there was no harm in trying something. Anything. He took the box out and looked inside. The familiar labels of immune-boosting herbs and supplements stared back at him. A thought crossed his mind. Maybe this was the sign they had all been waiting for. Maybe Max knew something they didn't. With a deep breath, Jason decided to take action. He reached out to an old nurse who had helped Emma in the past, someone who had a background in holistic medicine. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, but the urgency in Max's actions made him believe it couldn't hurt to try. He called her and explained the situation, then waited anxiously for her response. Max, meanwhile, lay down beside Emma again, his eyes still alert, waiting for the next step in the puzzle he seemed to have already figured out. The following morning, just as the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, a car pulled into the driveway. Jason opened the door to find the retired nurse, a gentle woman named Carol, carrying a small medical bag and looking more concerned than he had expected. He quickly led her inside, explaining the situation in a rushed, frantic tone. "I don't know what to do," Jason admitted as they walked toward Emma's room. "Max, he found this box of herbs. I know it sounds crazy, but he seems so sure of it. Could it really make a difference?" Carol paused, looking down at the box in Jason's hands. She raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "It's not crazy, Jason. Sometimes intuition leads us in ways we don't understand. And dogs like Max, they're incredibly perceptive. Maybe he sensed something we didn't." They entered Emma's room, where she lay, pale and still, her chest rising and falling slowly. Max, who had been lying beside her on the floor, immediately stood up and walked over to Carol, sniffing at her with quiet attention. His eyes, once again, were fixed on Emma, but there was something different in the way he looked at Carol. There was a knowing in those eyes, as though he trusted her to do something no one else could. Carol gently set the box of herbs down on the bedside table and began sorting through its contents. She pulled out several dried plants and began preparing a small batch of tea, explaining her process to Jason. "These herbs can support the immune system and help the body fight inflammation. They won't cure everything, but they may help ease some of her discomfort." Jason watched her work, still unsure what to expect. The fact that he was even considering this felt strange, almost like grasping at straws. But something about Max's unwavering attention made him believe it might be worth a shot. As Carol finished preparing the tea, she took a seat beside Emma's bed and began to gently massage some of the oils into her skin, focusing on pressure points that might help relieve tension and stimulate circulation. Max, who had been sitting quietly beside Emma's feet, finally stood up and moved closer. He nudged her hand gently with his nose, as if urging her to wake, to respond. For the first time in days, Emma's fingers twitched, and then, as if pulled by some invisible force, her eyelids fluttered open. Jason froze. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but it was enough. Max's head snapped up, his eyes locked on Emma's face, waiting. "Emma," Carol whispered, her voice soft but filled with hope. Slowly, Emma's lips parted, her voice barely a whisper. "Max, what's happening?" Max's tail began to wag, and for the first time in a long while, a spark of life seemed to return. Emma's eyes opened fully, and for the first time in days, a faint glimmer of recognition appeared in them. She blinked, then looked around the room, her gaze landing on Max, who was now sitting at her side, his tail gently thumping against the floor. It was as if the world around her had come alive again, though everything still felt distant and hazy. Her fingers moved slightly, the barest hint of strength returning to her limbs. "Max." Emma's voice was soft, barely a breath. Her throat was dry, and speaking took more effort than she could muster, but the words came out anyway. "What? What happened?" Max, as if hearing the urgency in her voice, leaned forward and gently nudged her hand with his nose, his eyes full of unspoken understanding. Carol, who had been watching the moment unfold with quiet awe, leaned forward as well. "Emma," Carol said gently, "you've been through a lot. Your body's been fighting hard, but we're here now. We've got you." Emma's eyes shifted to the nurse, and for a moment she seemed to search for meaning in her words. Her head felt heavy, her body sore, but there was something different now. Something had changed. The tightness in her chest, the overwhelming sense of dread, had loosened, even if just a little. The room was silent for a long moment, save for the soft thumping of Max's tail against the floor. His presence, calm and steady, grounded Emma in a way nothing else could. Her thoughts were muddled, but there was no question that Max had played a part in this inexplicable shift. In that moment, Emma felt something stir deep inside her. A spark, something she hadn't felt in days. With great effort, Emma lifted her hand and placed it on Max's head, gently running her fingers through his fur. It was a small movement, but it felt monumental. The connection between them, once so familiar, was now filled with a new kind of energy. A bond that, despite the odds, was somehow stronger than ever. Jason, who had been standing at the foot of the bed, took a step forward. His face was a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. He had been bracing himself for the worst, and yet here was his sister, awake, aware, and holding on to life in a way he hadn't expected. "Is this really happening?" Jason whispered, his voice cracking. You're really here." Emma's lips curved into a faint smile, though it was fragile. "I think so," she replied softly, her voice still weak but filled with determination. "And I think Max knew I'd be here." Max sat a little taller, his eyes locked on Emma's with a quiet, resolute understanding. He had never left her side, and in that moment, it was clear. He wasn't going to let her go. The days following Emma's miraculous awakening were filled with a sense of wonder and disbelief. The doctors, who had long since written off any possibility of recovery, were stunned when they saw Emma sitting up in bed, talking, and even eating small amounts of food. Her body, which had been so weak and frail just days before, was showing signs of life again. But it wasn't just the medical community that was captivated by Emma's recovery. It was the entire town of Willow Creek. News of the miracle spread quickly. Local reporters, initially skeptical, arrived at Emma's doorstep, eager to hear her story. How had she defied the odds? How had she gone from being at death's door to sitting up and speaking? Emma, who had always been a private person, found herself unexpectedly thrust into the spotlight. She wasn't sure what to make of the attention, but there was one thing she knew for certain. Max had played a pivotal role in her recovery. It wasn't just the herbs or the holistic remedies that had made a difference. It was Max's unwavering presence, his instinct, his loyalty, his bond with her, that had given her the strength to fight. On the day the local news team arrived to interview Emma, Max was by her side as always. He sat proudly beside her on the couch, his tail still and his eyes focused on the reporter. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that Max had been more than just a companion. He had been her guardian angel, the one who had never wavered, even when the rest of the world had given up hope. "I don't really know how to explain it," Emma said softly, her voice still weak but filled with emotion. "But I feel like Max knew. He's always known me better than anyone else. And I think, somehow, he knew what I needed to survive." The reporter nodded, visibly moved by Emma's words. "So, you're saying your dog helped save your life?" Emma smiled faintly, glancing down at Max, who was now lying at her feet. "Yes, in his own way, he did. As the interview aired on local news, it didn't take long for the story to capture the hearts of people far beyond Willow Creek. Social media exploded with posts about the miracle dog who had defied science and helped his owner survive against all odds. Animal lovers, skeptics, and medical professionals alike shared their thoughts and reactions. Some claimed it was pure coincidence. Others called it a miracle. But one thing was clear. Emma's story was one of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and her dog. And through it all, Max remained by Emma's side, ever watchful, ever faithful. As the weeks went by, Emma's condition continued to improve in ways no one could have predicted. Doctors marveled at her recovery, calling it unprecedented. The once weak, fragile woman who had been given only days to live was now walking around the house with the help of a walker, and soon, she was taking short, slow walks in the garden with Max by her side. Each step she took felt like a small victory, a testament to her resilience, and perhaps Max's unwavering belief in her. But despite the physical progress, Emma knew that her journey wasn't over. Her health had improved, but the disease still lingered in the background, a constant reminder of how fragile life could be. She couldn't take anything for granted. Still, there was a new sense of peace that had settled over her. The weight of the uncertainty, the fear that had once consumed her, had lifted, replaced by a quiet strength that came from within. Max, too, seemed to sense the shift. He was no longer just her protector. He had become her symbol of hope, her reminder that miracles were possible. He followed her everywhere, never more than a few steps away, always watching, always waiting. And though Emma could never fully explain what had happened, she knew that Max had played a critical role in her healing. His loyalty, his instincts, and the bond they shared had brought her back from the brink. One evening, as Emma sat on the porch with Max curled up beside her, she looked out over the garden. The flowers were in full bloom, the world around her vibrant with life. She felt a sense of calm that had eluded her for so long. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't waiting for something bad to happen. She was simply living, appreciating every moment, every breath. "I don't know how to thank you," Emma whispered to Max, scratching behind his ears. He looked up at her with his deep, knowing eyes, his tail giving a slow wag. He didn't need thanks. He had always been there, and that was enough. The story of Emma and Max became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a possibility for something greater, something unexpected. People from all walks of life came to visit Emma, hoping to meet the dog who had saved her life. And Emma was always happy to share her story. But more than the story, it was the quiet moments with Max that meant the most, the moments of peace, of gratitude, and of love that would stay with her forever. And as Emma looked at Max, she realized that, no matter what the future held, she would face it with him by her side.